These are the most interesting historical photos and unusual objects from the past. Let's get 100,000 subscribers. In post-war Germany, this man wears a placard reading "Keine Augen, keine Hände," meaning no eyes and no hands. The armbands were used to mark disabilities like deafness or a head injury, turning his body into a public sign. Washington, United States, 1909. Men in custody are forced to sweep a city street in public. The ankle chains and iron balls show how punishment was turned into daily labor on display. In Brazil, a detained man spent 5 years carving a hidden tunnel through solid concrete. When he finally broke through, it opened straight into the guardroom and ended everything in 1 second. Rome, 1948. A blind boy without hands learns the Braille alphabet by reading with his lips. The camera catches the moment raised dots become his only way to read. A French resistance fighter stands over a heap of shoes taken from prisoners at Natzweiler Struthof in 1944. It was the only large German-run camp built on what is now France, and the shoes were kept after their owners vanished. In the 1930s, a patient is wired to a general Faradayization machine, an early form of electrotherapy used in clinics. Doctors believed small electric currents could steady the nerves, but the big cabinet and cables make it look like a strange human experiment. From about 3 kilometers away, Toshio Fukada photographed the huge cloud over Hiroshima about 20 minutes after the 1945 blast. The mushroom shape formed as super hot air rose fast and pulled dust and smoke upward. Downtown Haverhill, Massachusetts, sits under floodwater in 1937, and a small boat glides past Western Union signs like it is a canal. It is a street you should be walking on, but the reflections in the shop windows show the city has been flipped upside down. In Brooklyn in winter 1980, a fire truck sits frozen after firefighters put out a hotel fire, with water turning into thick ice in minutes. The street looks like a white cave because every spray from the hoses hardened on contact and trapped the scene in place. A Sherman tank armor plate is covered with test hits, and each crater is labeled with the round that made it. The Soviet Union received thousands through Lend-Lease, and some Guards tank units used them heavily, so this battered steel was studied like a life or death report card. In 1912, engineers demonstrated an early dump truck that lifted its bed with a hydraulic cylinder instead of men with shovels. The crowd stands on the raised body to prove it could carry real weight and still tip cleanly. In the United States in the 1920s, crews painted road lines by towing a hand-run marking cart behind a car. Those simple stripes quietly rewired driving, turning open dirt roads into lanes with rules. Britain, 1943. 1 week of rationed food for 2 people, laid out like evidence on a table. For one adult, it could mean about 57 grams of butter, 57 grams of cheese, 227 grams of sugar, 3 pints of milk. Henry Ford and his son Edsel pose on the Ford quadricycle in December 1939, a reminder of his very first car experiment. The original 1896 machine used bicycle wheels and a small engine, and it pointed straight toward Ford Motor Company. Shanghai, 1949. A crowd crushes into a bank entrance to grab savings and valuables before the city changed hands. With money losing value fast and new rules feared, people raced the doorway like it was the last exit. At the Beatles concert in New York on August 23, 1966, officers drag a screaming fan back over a barrier as the crowd surges behind her. These shows were so loud and chaotic that the band could barely hear itself. In Kanazawa, Japan, in 1942, Buddhist temple bells were piled up after being taken in a national metal collection drive. Each bell that once called people to prayer was tagged for the furnace, turning sacred sound into silent metal. Al Capone poses in Brooklyn with his brothers in 1916, still just a teenager in a neat suit outside a pool room. Within a few years, his name would become one of the most feared and famous in Prohibition-era Chicago. On November 14, 1910, pilot Eugene Burton Ely lifted a Curtiss biplane from a short wooden platform built on the ship Birmingham in Hampton Roads Virginia. It was the first airplane takeoff from a ship, a stunt that opened the door to aircraft carriers. In the United States in 1953, this bed smoker gadget held a lit cigarette and channeled the smoke through tubes so a person could doze off without dropping ash on the sheets. It is a sharp reminder of how common bedtime smoking was. On Kodiak Island, Alaska, in 1957, a man carries the huge head of a Kodiak bear like a backpack. Kodiak bears are among the largest brown bears on Earth, and trophy photos like this were once proof of status in the wild North. Maria Shriver and Arnold Alois Schwarzenegger pose on their wedding day on April the 26th, 1986. The bride came from the Kennedy family, and the groom was already a global film star, making the ceremony a headline before the vows were even over. Prague, Czechoslovakia, March 9th, 1953. A massive public farewell for Joseph Stalin floods the street from building to building. Across the Soviet bloc, mourning was staged on a huge scale. Berlin, 1945. A Soviet T-34-85 tank crashes into a subway entrance and ends up wedged in the stairwell. The photo shows how city combat could turn a normal street into a trap for a 40-ton machine. Germany, 1929. Men carry a foldable car that can be taken apart and moved by hand like luggage. Its small engine could reach about 40 to 50 kilometers per hour, and the real trick was storing a car in almost no space. Finland, 18th century. An early leather diving suit hangs like a sealed skin, with 3 small glass ports as its only view. Suits like this relied on air sent down from the surface, so one kinked hose could turn the deep into a silent lock. Times Square in 1947 glows with billboard towers that turned a crossroads into a 24-hour stage. It got its name in April 1904 when the New York Times moved into the newly built Times building. A powerful athlete lifts a heavy block overhead during a public multi-sport challenge in Paris. The contest was promoted by the newspaper Le Journal, which ran from 1892 to 1944, and it combined 10 events like weightlifting, running, and the long jump. A chimney sweep in Frankfurt, Germany, 1947, poses with his bicycle packed with brushes and long rods. In the coal stove era, clearing chimneys meant heat for whole buildings and less dangerous smoke indoors. The SISJ-5 Rhinus airfield cleaner used a Volkswagen cab perched above a giant suction mouth to swallow loose stones and scrap from runways. It was built to protect jet engines because one forgotten bolt on the pavement could wreck a takeoff. In 1905, 2 women pose on a studio swing with blunt signs that read, "Man wanted and not married." It is early personal advertising in one photo, turning a private search for a husband into a public message. This is the Dynasphere, a one-wheel car built in 1932, with the driver sitting inside a giant rotating ring. It could move forward smoothly, but turning and stopping were so awkward that the future looked more like a rolling trap. France, 1932. An amphibious bicycle rides onto the water on 2 huge float wheels like a pedal-powered boat. It was part stunt and part experiment, showing how far inventors would go to make one machine conquer both road and river. This is an early Harley-Davidson motorcycle linked to the first prototype built in 1903, photographed on display in Chicago in 1938. Family stories say the first carburetor was made from a tomato can. An Afghan lawyer runs his office on a market bench in 1969, reading papers while clients come and go. In many bazaars, legal help lived right beside daily trade, so a deal or dispute could be settled on the spot. Marilyn Monroe and Joe DiMaggio visit the Hiroshima Memorial Hall in Japan during their honeymoon in 1954. In front of a scale model of the ruined city, the world's biggest celebrity couple stepped into one of the quietest rooms on Earth. This American Relief Administration food package for Soviet Russia listed about 117 pounds of basics, like flour, rice, sugar, cooking fat, tea, and canned milk. 1,163,296 of these parcels were shipped. Around 1936, a demonstrator operates the Echo-Scophony Model 202, a mechanical television that used fast-spinning mirrors to scan the picture. The image was tiny and faint, but it delivered real moving programs years before home electronic television became common. At Bassingbourn, England, the crew inspects a B-17G Flying Fortress with a massive hole in its side after a Munich mission on July 6, 1944. The bomber was built to keep flying on several engines, yet a single flak burst could still peel the metal open like a tin can. In California in 1935, strongman Galen Goff lies under a ramp as a loaded beer truck rolls over him in a stadium stunt. The trick was careful weight spread and perfect alignment, because one wrong inch could end the show. During restoration work on Easter Island, a worker climbs a ladder to clear the clogged nostril of a Moai statue. Up close, the stone face looks almost alive, and each bit of dirt removed reveals sharp details carved to stare across the island for centuries. Texas, 1968. Cotton pickers drag long sacks behind them that could weigh over 100 pounds when full. Even as machine harvesters spread, many fields still needed handwork. In 1966, rice fields in Vietnam are covered with countless round craters after a high-altitude air mission by B-52 aircraft. From above it looks like a strange pattern, but it is farmland turned into a dotted map of impact points. During the 1915 to 1926 outbreak of a mystery sleeping sickness called encephalitis lethargica, Red Cross crews carried patients who could not stay awake and drifted into long sleep. Doctors never found a clear cause. New York, 1903. A department store cash room where money from every checkout shot in through pneumatic tubes and landed at a central desk. This system sped up sales and cut theft, turning the whole building into a noisy money pipeline. Kuwait, 1991. A firefighter walks through a storm of sprayed water toward towering oil well fires that turned daylight into dusk. The smoke was so thick it fell back as oily soot, making the desert look like it was raining black. In November 1907, Count Henry de la Vole wears a thick padded impact suit beside Victor Tatin's experimental monoplane during tests. Early flying was pure risk, so this quilted armor was a desperate attempt to save a pilot before real safety design existed. London, 1940. During nightly air raids, a man sleeps inside a stone sarcophagus because the thick walls felt safer than his own bed. In the Blitz, museums and underground spaces became strange shelters, and even ancient tombs turned into modern hideouts. In 1911, suffrage activists hold a hand-painted Votes for Women banner, turning a private demand into a public challenge. In many countries, women still could not vote in national elections, so these signs and photos were built to pressure lawmakers and pull new supporters in. Market Street in San Francisco, after the 1906 earthquake, looks like a canyon of rubble and smoke, with tiny crowds moving through the ruins. The quake and the fires that followed erased whole blocks. Charlie Berger stands on a public scaffold in Benton, Illinois, on April 19, 1928, smiling as the crowd watches. This scene was among the last times a punishment was staged so openly in the United States, with people packed in like it was a performance. On March 18, 1929, an Indigenous Australian man on Queensland's north coast photographs another man with a box camera. Cheap portable cameras were finally reaching remote places, letting people control their own image. Clark Gable and Marilyn Monroe rehearsed during the filming of The Misfits in 1960. The script was written by Arthur Miller for Monroe, and it became both her last completed movie and Gable's final screen role. On St. Paul Island, Alaska, in the 1890s, crews drive northern fur seals together during the Pribilof Islands fur trade. International outrage over the collapsing herds helped push the North Pacific Fur Seal Convention in 1911. Chinese infantry march along the Great Wall near Beijing in October 1938 during the Second Sino-Japanese War. Built for ancient border defense, the wall became a real military route again, turning a famous monument into a moving frontline road. This is an early IBM Winchester hard disk system from 1973, built with 2 modules rated at about 30 megabytes each. The nickname came from the 30 and 30 capacity, and the name stuck as a common word for hard drives in several countries. In Germany in 1961, a textile company launched an advertising balloon shaped like a giant pair of women's legs, turning the sky into a billboard. The dangling model was tethered with lines and sandbags, so the joke stayed in place while the crowd stared upward. Thessaloniki, Greece, 1944. German trenches are reinforced with Jewish tombstones taken from the city cemetery. The cemetery was broken up, and its carved stones were reused across the city, so even the earthworks were built from stolen names. Lviv, 1943. A prisoner orchestra at the Yanovska detention camp plays a tune later known as the Tango of Death in a courtyard. The music was forced to accompany moments when people were lined up under guard, turning a song into a cold weapon. Soviet film cameramen work in a snow trench near Leningrad in 1943 to 1944, aiming a heavy movie camera like a weapon. Their footage fed newsreels across the country, proving the story was real, even when the city was cut off. At NASA Langley in Hampton, Virginia, on July 7, 1959, engineers line up body-molded seat shells for a space capsule crew. Each seat was cast to fit one person and spread heavy forces, a quiet detail that could decide whether a mission stayed controlled. Nizhny Tagil, 1944. A tractor built on a T-34 tank chassis hauls firewood straight into town, like it is still on the front line. War factories reused armored hulls for heavy work, turning a battlefield machine into a winter delivery truck. United States, 1968. A museum curator measures a coelacanth specimen, a fish long thought extinct until a catch off South Africa in 1938. This living fossil is one of the closest known relatives of the fish line that eventually led to land animals. Soviet aircraft gunners train on a target range in the 1930s, firing from mounted positions that copy a plane turret. The box bases and fixed sights show how crews learned lead and timing on the ground before they ever went up. Joseph Stalin works in the garden at his country house during a break in 1932. A private camera caught him in ordinary clothes, a rare look at how power tried to hide behind quiet routine. A young Indonesian woman has her teeth filed with a metal tool during a traditional rite, Indonesia, 1938. The reshaped teeth were meant to mark adulthood and tame bad urges before marriage. A linotype operator in the United States types on a keyboard that casts whole lines of text in hot metal, 1920. One wrong touch could jam the machine or splash molten lead, turning office work into factory risk. United States Navy aircraft carrier Lexington is hidden at sea while destroyers lay a thick smokescreen between 1932 and 1936. This drill tested how fast a carrier group could vanish from enemy eyes during an air attack. French women pack thousands of steel balls into artillery shells at a wartime factory, 1915. The front line needed so much metal that this assembly line turned hands into weapons makers overnight. Inventor Sanfirov tests a strapped wing rig meant to let a jumper glide after leaving a plane, 1935. No confirmed report says whether the device ever worked or went beyond this test. Tightrope legend Ivy Baldwin steps onto a cable over South Boulder Creek Canyon on his 82nd birthday, July 31, 1948. He had been doing high-wire stunts since the 1890s, and here he is, still gambling with gravity in old age. Miss New York shakes hands with Miss California after the Miss America 1925 win, with a radio microphone staged like a trophy. The era sold modern fame through airwaves and pageants, while the winners were still expected to look modest and silent. A Flanders electric car fights through a mud test during American Automobile Association trials in the United States, 1912 to 1914. Early electric cars were quiet and clean, but heavy batteries and bad roads could stop them cold. American schoolchildren in Connecticut, United States, performed the Bellamy Salute during the Pledge of Allegiance, 1942. Later that year, it was replaced with the hand over the heart because the gesture was being mistaken for a fascist salute. A French First World War motor ambulance hauls a strapped casualty on a full-length stretcher, 1915. The low, narrow chassis and Red Cross flag show how early cars were turned into frontline rescue machines for muddy forest roads. Korean civilians cling between freight cars as a train heads south during the Korean War, 1950. Ropes, blankets, and packed bundles show a desperate ride out as the front line surged. Moscow residents received gas masks on Mayakovsky Square during civil defense drills, 1941. Photographer Arkady Shaiket caught a child being fitted on the street while stacks of ready kits wait on the table. Employees of Daimler-Benz lined up cars to spell a pro-regime salute beside the Mercedes star in Germany during the 1930s. Seen from the air, a brand logo and mass political loyalty theater share the same asphalt in a chilling way. A German pilot shows an early oxygen generator used to breathe during high-altitude flights in the First World War. The tube, mask, and strapped canister look like a life support kit built for an open cockpit sky. Peter, a 6-year-old alligator from the London Zoo, is held like a pet in 1937 as his keeper tests his cuddly reputation. The calm grip and the wide-open jaws make the whole scene feel one blink away from disaster. A worker scrubs the teeth of a life-size Tyrannosaurus Rex statue at Birmingham Zoo in Birmingham, England, during the 1980s. From that ladder, the grin looks disturbingly alive, built to scare visitors on purpose. A German sniper balances on a homemade wooden seat strapped to a tree, aiming his rifle in June 1944. It is a silent hunting perch made from branches and rope, turning one pine into a hidden tower. Alpha Group operators aim from behind a concrete wall near the Security Service building in Grozny, summer 1996. A belt-fed gun is propped on the rubble, and the men sit on kitchen chairs, showing how tight the city lines were. Workers use a crane to raise a fallen Stonehenge stone during restoration in Wiltshire, England, 1963. The ancient blocks were reset upright and locked with modern support hidden underground. The outer wall of the Salvation Army headquarters on Queen Victoria Street in London collapses after a night air raid on 10 May 1941. Police photographers Arthur Cross and Fred Tibbs captured the moment as officer files and papers vanished into the dust and smoke. Airmen of the United States, Martin Marauder bomber, Miss Emily sit on the torn fuselage after a mission. Manston, Kent, England, 2 August 1943. The jagged hole beside the cockpit shows how close the crew came to losing the aircraft on the way home. Men in the British Gold Coast, now Ghana, read a recruiting poster outside a British Commonwealth enlistment office in the 1940s. Thousands from this colony were signed into West African units and shipped far from home under the word Together. Londoners watched the funeral procession of Winston Churchill from the roof of a ruined building in London, 1965. 2 decades after the Second World War, the broken walls still served as a grandstand for the biggest goodbye in the city. Ground crew arm an interstate TDR-1 radio-controlled aircraft in the Pacific, 1944. With the nose cover removed, a television camera is visible, so a pilot far away can steer it in real time. On June 24, 1941, the New York Times printed Senator Harry S. Truman saying the United States should help whichever side was losing in the war between Germany and the Soviet Union. He added, he did not want Germany to win. In 1980, Mother Ilaria, an Orthodox nun, stands with a rifle at the Holy Trinity Monastery in Kosovo and Metohija. The image became a symbol of rising unrest around Serbian monasteries in the province. 2 15-year-old boys stand in a back alley during a police standoff in Boston, Massachusetts, United States, 1948. Ed Bancroft was being questioned as a witness, then pulled a pistol and forced Bill Ronan to stay with him. Student protesters leave Willard Straight Hall at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York in April 1969, carrying rifles and ammunition belts. The building had been held for 36 hours, and the standoff ended after talks over a Black Studies program and student discipline. A German V-1 pulse jet missile dives toward a London suburb in 1944. When its buzzing engine stopped, people knew the silent seconds meant impact. A 3-year-old chimney sweep stands on a London rooftop, 1933, holding tools almost as tall as he is. Tiny hands cleaned soot from narrow flues while the city kept working below. A packed crowd fills the square in front of the shattered Reichstag in Berlin, year 1948. With the city newly divided, this rally signaled open defiance of Soviet-backed rule in the East. On April 1, 1950, the West German newspaper Wiesbaden Tageblatt printed this staged photo as a crashed, unidentified flying object pilot under United States Army escort. The pilot was actually a soldier's young daughter wearing an oxygen mask, a prank that fooled many readers. Paris during the Great Seine, flood of 1910, when streets near the Eiffel Tower turned into canals and boats replaced carriages. After weeks of rain, the river rose to its highest level in decades, forcing engineers to protect metro tunnels and basements from rushing water. A woman wrestles a box of matches from a monk as he tries to ignite his robe in a public protest. Seoul, South Korea, 1963. Jockey Frank Hayes won at Belmont Park in New York in 1923, even though he died during the race. A heart attack stopped him, but his body stayed in the saddle until the finish. Hiroshima, 1965. Rebuilt streets run along the Motoyasu River near the Aioi Bridge. Only 20 years after the blast, busy shops and cars sit where whole blocks once vanished overnight. Red Army soldiers sprint past the wreck of a German armored train during the fighting near Odessa, 1944. Armored trains carried turret guns and thick steel plates, but once the track or engine was smashed, they became a huge, stuck target. Women are pulled from a smoke-filled cellar during the final days of fighting in Osnabrück, Germany, 7 April 1945. In those last weeks, many foreign forced laborers were trapped underground as whole streets filled with rubble and fire. Spanish director Luis Buñuel carries a wooden cross on the French set of The Milky Way, 1969. The film follows two drifters toward Santiago de Compostela and twists church arguments into dark comedy. Volunteers of the Abraham Lincoln Battalion from the United States man a machine gun at Jarama, Spain in 1937. For many, it was their first combat, fought to keep the Madrid to Valencia road open. An Israeli family in Ramat Gan wears gas masks while sheltering with their cat during the 1991 Persian Gulf conflict. Iraq fired Scud missiles at Israel, and people feared poison gas, so many families sealed rooms and slept like this. Indian Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru rides the Moscow metro with his daughter Indira Gandhi during his 1955 visit to the Soviet Union. In 1966, she became Prime Minister of India, and photos like this were used to signal closer India-Soviet ties. A London Underground rail car is hauled on wheeled dollies through a city street in England, 1926. It looks like a normal coach on a normal road, but it is being dragged above ground to reach a depot or a new tunnel section. Fence lines surround the torn-open reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant, May 1986, Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic. After the explosion, crews rushed to seal and guard the wreckage that spilled out of the building. A Colt revolver is fitted with a tiny camera bolted under the barrel, 1938. It exposes a photograph the moment the trigger is pulled, an eerie proof of what happened. A Mexican artist couple sketches their first impressions of San Francisco, 1930. The drawing begins before the trip is even unpacked, like the city is being pinned down in real time. A United States Army sergeant and his working dog step out into open air for a parachute jump in Vietnam, 1968. The leash and harness make the dog a second body on the same fall, trusting the pull of one ripcord. Girls from a church boarding school walk in a line with American soldiers and a nun, still in their Sunday clothes. The Netherlands, 1945, just after the German occupation ended, when freedom arrived, guarded and uneasy. Spanish soldiers, mules, and an artillery gun stand outside Barcelona City Hall after the Catalan Republic was proclaimed. October 1934, when a sudden political break turned a civic square into a guarded front door. An Australian soldier walks alone through the ruins of Ypres, Belgium, in 1917. The city was hit so often that whole streets vanished, leaving only broken church towers as landmarks. A priest gives last rites to José Rodriguez during the early Cuban Revolution in Cuba, 1960. Armed men stand guard as he kneels, moments before he is led away to face his sentence. A Boeing Superfortress bomber slices into a biplane smoke trail at an air show in 1950. The pass was off by seconds, turning a planned stunt into a near mid-air collision in front of 60,000 people. 15-year-old Sophia Loren walks in the Miss Italy contest, 1950. The judges created a new title, Miss Elegance, just to crown her. Newly trained nurses pose on the steps of their school in the United States in the early 20th century, wearing starched white uniforms and the caps that marked their rank. Each holds a rolled diploma, a sign that nursing was turning into a tightly controlled profession just before modern medicine changed hospital life. Men crowd the doorway beneath a sign reading Taika Opium in Lahore, Punjab, Pakistan, October 1978. The scene shows a taboo substance advertised in plain sight, turning a narrow alley into a tense, silent queue. Captured German generals stand in silence before the shattered Berlin Cathedral in Berlin on May 10, 1945, photographed by Alexander Kapustiansky. Behind them, the torn dome and broken stone turn a famous landmark into a blunt proof of how close the fighting came to the city's heart. Geronimo stands at the right with other Chiricahua Apache men, holding rifles as the camera freezes a tense moment on their own land. For about 25 years, he kept evading United States forces until he was forced to yield in 1886 and was kept under guard far from home. William Anderson, Ance Hatfield, born 1839, poses on horseback in West Virginia as a former Confederate soldier who became the most famous face of the Hatfield and McCoy family feud. After the feud made headlines across the United States, he built a profitable timber business and lived until 1921. In 1989, crews tear down the inner German border barriers that had split East and West Germany for about 40 years. Within months, the guarded strip began turning into open roads and fields, and people who lived only a few miles apart could finally cross without a permit. Louis Cyr, a French-Canadian strongman, poses in the 1900s at the peak of his fame. He claimed feats like lifting 500 pounds with one finger and supporting 4,337 pounds on his back, numbers so huge that people still argue how they were measured. In Bonn, West Germany, in 1981, a young protester holds a sign that says, "We want no Hiroshima." The made-up word mixed Europe with Hiroshima, showing how real the superpower standoff felt on ordinary streets. California in the early 1850s. Miners shovel river gravel into long wooden sluice boxes, hoping a few heavy flakes will stay behind. Most never became rich, but this simple setup helped pull huge amounts of gold that rapidly turned empty valleys into boomtowns. Arthur Conan Doyle poses in British Army medical uniform in South Africa in 1900 during the Boer conflict. Between long hospital shifts, the creator of Sherlock Holmes used real field notes that later fed his books about the campaign. Sigmund Freud and his daughter Anna look out from a train as they leave Vienna for London in 1938. The 82-year-old founder of psychoanalysis was slipping away under intense pressure, with only a few weeks left before he would never return. 5-year-old Manuel stands barefoot with 2 pails after picking shrimp in Mississippi, United States, in February 1911. Seafood plants along the Gulf often hired whole families during rush season, and this photo shows how early a workday could start. Soviet and American soldiers stand in formation outside Spandau Prison in West Berlin in the 1970s, waiting for the guard change. It was one of the Cold War's strangest rituals. Former enemies took turns holding the same keys to a single high-profile prisoner. The Seine floods central Paris in 1910, turning the streets near Saint-Lazare station into a canal where boats pass shop signs and street clocks. On January 28, the water reached about 8.62 meters and took roughly 35 days to fall back. United States troops eat a hot field meal in the Siberian snow during Russia's turmoil in 1918. They were part of the Allied Siberian expedition, sent thousands of miles from home to guard rail lines and supplies, a mission so confusing that many soldiers joked they only understood the cold. Women from Sultan Abdulhamid II's palace household pose with 2 court attendants in Constantinople in 1909. Made as the old court system was being dismantled, their heavy cloaks and fixed stairs feel like a sealed world caught in its last days. A former soldier plays a guitar on a Tokyo street in 1951, standing on artificial legs as the city rushes past. In post-war Japan, many wounded veterans survived by street music and small donations because steady work and support were hard to find. Masashi Nii, a Hiroshima survivor, stands by his car in 1967, covered in hand-painted messages calling for a world without nuclear arms. He turned the car into a rolling billboard and drove it across cities for years, forcing strangers to read his warning at every stoplight. A lone man surveys the flattened blocks of Hiroshima in 1945, with the ruined Hiroshima Prefectural Industrial Promotion Hall still standing in the distance. That broken shell later became a permanent landmark, and this empty foreground shows how an entire city vanished in a single morning. Captured North Korean soldiers dance a quadrille in a detention camp in South Korea in 1952, with a small Statue of Liberty rising behind them. The contrast is eerie, a cheerful ballroom step played out inside barbed wire and watchtowers. Benito Mussolini, Italy's dictator, fixes a wide-eyed stare on the crowd during a Rome speech in 1935, announcing a nationwide call-up. The pose was meant to look unstoppable, but it also shows how much his power depended on spectacle and fear. A packed street in Moscow on October 31, 1905, as marchers demand the release of political prisoners. It came during the 1905 revolution, when strikes and protests pushed the empire to promise a parliament, even as police watched every banner. Japanese schoolgirls kneel on the street during Emperor Hirohito's radio announcement of surrender in 1945. Many people heard his voice for the first time that day, and the shock of the words made city life stop in place. In Santiago, Chile, in 1973, soldiers stand over a street fire where seized political books are being destroyed after the military takeover. The message was brutal and simple. The new rulers wanted certain ideas to vanish, starting with the pages people could still read. Parisians slip out of the city in 1940, pushing bicycles beside carts loaded with bedding and crates as German troops enter. The road became a moving river of ordinary life, where a suitcase and a bicycle could decide whether you ate or slept that night. Japanese troops and a priest conduct a military burial for a fallen Russian captain during the Russo-Japanese War of 1904 to 1905. Even in a bitter modern war, this ceremony showed an old code of respect that crossed enemy lines for one officer's final moment. An American farmer trudges back from the store in 1937, carrying flour and boxed goods along a muddy road in Alabama. He is returning to Skyline Farms, a government-run cooperative community created during the Great Depression to resettle struggling families on planned small farms. A wedding like this became almost impossible in the Soviet Union after February 15, 1947, when a decree forbade marriages between Soviet citizens and foreigners. Officials said it was for protection, but it often meant forced separation, and a private life turned into a state case. Agatha Christie, creator of Hercule Poirot and Miss Marple, is photographed in an apron with a bowl in hand, looking like any ordinary home cook. She joked that washing dishes was so dull it pushed her mind toward dark crime plots, and the contrast is exactly her secret. A Turkish officer poses in 1947 in a new dress uniform with sharp fashion-like lines that look more like a runway than a barracks. Some sources credit the design to Coco Chanel, but the paper trail is unclear, which only makes the story feel stranger. Rudyard Kipling poses in Vermont, United States in 1895, soon after finishing The Jungle Book. He wrote much of it at his remote home near Brattleboro, where quiet New England winters helped shape his wild India stories. A horse tows a stranded Volkswagen van on a German road during the 1973 oil crisis, when fuel lines and driving bans made cars feel useless overnight. For many families, the fastest engine they could still count on was the one that ate hay. Rita Hayworth, born Margarita Cancino, poses by a pool in California around 1940, just as Columbia Pictures was turning her into its biggest star. Her image soon went worldwide, and during the Second World War, her photo was pinned in barracks and painted on planes. A glamorous couple stages a playful photo shoot with the man carrying heavy pails, while the woman wears a dramatic black top and a checked skirt. The joke is the contrast. Hard work props beside high-fashion styling, a classic magazine trick to make celebrities look both real and unreal at the same time. A Pan-American Boeing 747 makes an emergency landing at San Francisco International Airport on July 30, 1971, drawing a crowd as the giant jet sits low to the ground. Photos like this shocked people because the jumbo age was still new. This 1882 display shows how extreme tight corset lacing could squeeze the lower ribs inward, leaving a narrow wasp waist shape in bone. The look was a fashion status symbol, but the constant pressure could make breathing harder and push the body into a shape it was never built to keep. German aviators Hermann Göring and Bruno Lurzer pose in a stripped-down car in 1918, still wearing their flying uniforms and medals. Within a generation, both moved from cockpit fame into high-level power in Germany's aviation world. Men of the United States Army Air Force's 91st Bombardment Group pose in the 1940s, wearing skull masks to match their Jolly Roger emblem. The stunt was pure morale and intimidation, turning a deadly serious air war into a photo that still looks like a warning. An M3 General Lee tank crew carries an injured comrade out during the Battle of the Kursk salient in July 1943. The United States-built tank reached the Soviet front through the Lend-Lease program, and its tight hatches made every rescue a race against seconds. This is the Backenbau 349 Natter, a German experimental vertical takeoff interceptor found by United States troops in Austria in 1945. Its honeycomb nose held many small rockets, a last-minute idea meant to launch fast, climb hard, and surprise bombers. American Red Cross workers carry a flu victim on a stretcher to a marked ambulance in Missouri in 1918. During the Spanish flu wave, volunteers in masks became the city's emergency lifeline, moving the sick through quiet streets that suddenly felt dangerous. Sheep graze in front of the ruined Frauenkirche in Dresden, East Germany, in 1957, with its broken tower still standing like a snapped tooth. The city left the wreck as a public reminder for decades, so everyday life unfolded right beside a frozen scar. United States General George Patton poses in Frankfurt, Germany, on March 29, 1945, holding an old German flintlock rifle found after the city was taken. The modern helmet beside an antique weapon makes a strange trophy moment, like history collapsing into one frame. In 1944, 9-year-old Evelyn Valentine's bedroom disappeared behind over 21,000 cards and gifts sent from all over the United States. The mail avalanche came while she was recovering from rheumatic fever. A German tank commander in France in 1940 listens for orders through a radio headset as the armored column moves forward. That wire and earpiece mattered almost as much as the gun, because faster crew coordination could decide who reached the next crossroads first. In June 1945, a German girl offers flowers to Soviet soldiers on bicycles in the shattered streets of Königsberg. Within a year, the city would be renamed Kaliningrad, and moments like this were the quiet reset between two worlds. In 1890 in India, Prince Alexander Mikhailovich poses with his group beside a trained cheetah used for elite hunting. Cheetahs were kept calm with a hood and released for a sudden sprint that could catch an antelope before anyone could blink. In Paris in 1944, French gendarmes and a resistance member aimed their rifles from a stone embankment. The mixed group shows how fast the city changed hands, with old uniforms and new allies sharing the same line. In Glastonbury, Connecticut in February 1949, state police began using radar readings to enforce speed limits on this stretch of road. The device had been tested since 1947, and drivers suddenly learned that a hidden motorcycle and a sign could measure their car from far away. On June 28, 1942 in Moscow, residents of the Dzerzhinsky district funded 7 KV-1 heavy tanks and watched their handover in a packed street ceremony. The district name painted on the armor turned private donations into rolling steel. In September 1939, newly mobilized Swiss soldiers crowd a tram stop in Zurich, with the city still running around them. Switzerland could call up hundreds of thousands of men within days. On September 1, 1939 in Munich, residents gathered with their bicycles to hear a live radio address announcing the start of fighting in Poland. The street became a silent listening room, showing how a single loudspeaker could pull an entire city into the same moment at once. In 1945, the Nakajima Kika sits on the runway before its second test flight, with Lieutenant Susumu Takaoka in the cockpit. Inspired by new German jet ideas but built as its own machine, Japan's first jet arrived when fuel and time were already disappearing. On July 25, 1945, an overhead camera caught the Japanese escort carrier Shimane Maru surrounded by shock rings and smoke after Allied aircraft scored direct hits. In the final weeks of the Pacific War, a few well-placed strikes could turn a flight deck into a silent wreck in minutes. In the 1920s, German aviation cadets posed in Lipetsk, Soviet Russia, where a hidden flight school trained them far from home. After the First World War, Germany faced strict limits on air forces, so this quiet program kept pilot skills alive behind closed gates. In February 1937 at Jarama in Spain, American volunteers of the International Brigades, including the Abraham Lincoln Battalion, man a heavy gun position. It was their first major action, and many learned in a single day how fast ideals can collide with reality. In 1871, Chang, billed as the Chinese giant, poses for a studio portrait with his wife and his manager. The show posters sold him as a human wonder, but this quiet photo hints at the business deals and non-stop travel behind the stage. In 1967 in Austria, Arnold Schwarzenegger stands beside his older brother Meinhard, years before the world knew his name. After a family tragedy in 1971, Arnold later helped support Meinhard's young son. In 1921, French writer Anatole France won the Nobel Prize in Literature, seen here at his writing desk. He donated his entire prize money to relief funds for Russia during the 1921 to 1922 hunger crisis. In 1899, a huge gas balloon lifts off from the governor's garden in Minsk, while a tight crowd surrounds the launch circle. Before airplanes were common, balloon flights were rare public spectacles, and no one watching could know where the wind would drop the crew next. In 1856 to 1857, the highest Muslim court of Tlemcen in French Algeria is shown with its judge and scholars gathered around a law book. Decisions on marriage, property, and inheritance were written by hand here. In 1914 near Ypres in Belgium, a German field bakery runs like a factory, with portable ovens and long tables covered in fresh loaves. Bread was a frontline weapon of morale, and these mobile bakeries could feed thousands a day without ever leaving the war zone. In 1945, a former prisoner of Buchenwald shows a United States soldier a grim item recovered inside the camp. Investigators photographed such evidence to document systematic abuse and to support later trials. In 1942, a British soldier demonstrates an Enfield rifle fitted with the EI Cup launcher firing the No. 68 rifle launched projectile. It used a blank cartridge and was meant for short distance, but it gave ordinary infantry a rare chance against armored vehicles. In 1942, in Murmansk, volunteers at a Sunday work shift roll frozen barrels of fish into rail cars for shipment to Leningrad. With the city cut off and supplies scarce, these wagons of food were timed like lifelines because one missed train could mean empty shelves for weeks. In 1935, Soviet Ambassador Alexander Troyanovsky and his wife step out into a snowy Washington night after a formal event. He was the first envoy sent after the United States recognized the Soviet Union in 1933. After Austria was annexed in March 1938, Jewish residents of Vienna were made to scrub pro-independence slogans from the sidewalks while crowds and police watched. The message was clear and chilling. The street itself became a stage, and the old Austria vanished in front of everyone. In Aachen in 1945, schoolboys hand in textbooks from the previous dictatorship era, stacking them on the teacher's desk. In the American sector of Germany, changing the books was one of the first silent steps toward changing what an entire generation would learn next. In 1945, women who survived the Bergen-Belsen camp sit together, trying to eat and rest after liberation. Behind them is what the rescuers found, a silent background that explains their exhausted faces. In summer to autumn 1941, banners praising Germany's wartime leadership and a local nationalist leader hang over the Hlinsky Gate of Jovkva Castle in what is now Lviv region, Ukraine. The old stone arch turns into a public billboard. In 1920, King Alexander of Greece is seen with his dog shortly before a strange accident in the royal gardens at Tatoi. An animal injury during that walk led to a severe infection, and he passed away 3 weeks later on October 25, 1920. At midday on November 25, 1944, a German V-2 rocket hit the Woolworth store in New Cross, London, while it was packed with shoppers. The memorial records that 168 people lost their lives in what became Britain's worst V-2 incident. In the 1930s in Colorado, Joe Arity, a young man with an intellectual disability, was wrongly convicted after a confession that did not match key details. His sentence was carried out in 1939, and he received a posthumous pardon in 2011.